Welcome, welcome everyone this Thursday. Thank you for being here. Today we're going to focus on those of you whose career paths have taken unexpected turns. This means pivots, perhaps pauses, or multi-directional moves. The admission committee at top-ranked business schools doesn't penalize complexity, and this is a myth that I hope that by the end of the session today we will bust, because these pivots and these moves are part of discovery, part of life. But the admission teams do penalize lack of clarity. So there is a difference between, of course, having made those pivots, and a difference between that and how you're presenting that story. So my goal today is to help you own your journey, really, really important in this process, and tie it to a forward-looking MBA story. So that is the goal that we're going to have, or that I have for you today here. And we will continue on that path. So one thing that I oftentimes hear is that, I don't have a traditional pathway. So I'm not an investment banker, I'm not a consultant. And as such, I'm going to have a hard time being admitted to top-ranked business schools. That is actually a myth. What admission teams care about is whether your choices show deliberation. Did your pivot reflect curiosity, values, a desire to grow? If your resume raises questions and your essays don't answer them, that's when doubt creeps in. And of course, that's when you miss that lack of clarity that you need to have in order to be successful in your application process, and being able to showcase to them that you know what you're doing. Essentially, you know why you're here. So let's talk about who am I? What do we do here that we can talk about this with some degree of certainty. I am the founder of Sia Admissions, which is a boutique admission coaching firm focused on supporting applicants in a personalized approach in telling stories. We have over 90% placement rate here, and we see this time and again, especially when we look at candidates that didn't get admitted and they're looking to reapply. So when we work with reapplicants, oftentimes this is the biggest issue that led to them being rejected, is not having this clarity of where they've been and where they're looking to go. So we approach coaching here at Sia Admissions from a very tailored approach. We obviously have insider expertise in terms of coaching with deep insights from top MBA programs that we understand. We've been working supporting applicants for those schools for several years, close to a decade. And we've seen patterns, we've seen what they're looking for. And we do offer comprehensive support, which means that we're walking the journey with you as you go through the MBA application process. When I founded Sia, I saw that this was something that was lacking in the industry, and that's what led me to solve the problem, essentially. And that's why we've been here for close to a decade, doing this one-on-one with applicants. And in that process, we've come to see patterns in terms of particularly applicants who always have challenges or experience challenges, or it's internal doubt in terms of how they're presenting their story. But it's important to remember that you're really not bound by what you've done, but your future vision must be grounded in your experiences. So if you're moving from engineering, for example, to product management, how have you prepared, right? What experiences did you have that made you sure that this is the next move for you? Where are your transferable skills? What did you observe in the experience as an engineer? Or what did you engage in that make you want to move in this new path now? So clarity and credibility are what separates compelling stories from risky ones. And we hear oftentimes the risky stories where it's, I have never worked in finance, but I want to work in venture capital because I think it's cool, right? Those are the kinds of stories that definitely don't get you in to business schools, just because they are so risky and the probability is so low that the admission team won't be willing to bet on that story. Some candidates actually talk themselves out of admission, believe it or not. And how do they do this? By sounding unsure, in terms of, I'm still figuring these things out. That means from the admission team's perspective that you don't have time to figure things out, essentially, in business school. This is graduate school. This is not undergraduate. Graduate school, you start before you step foot on campus, recruiting starts, right? There's no time for real exploration, right? Or sometimes applicants are like, I know someone who has done venture capital and I'm going to take this defensive stance that I can do it too. They're not there to argue with you. They will take at face value what you share. Therefore, if they don't believe it, they're not going to have a discussion with you about why that goal doesn't make sense. So that's definitely going about it the wrong way. Others kind of go in this other way, which is dropping a lot of buzzwords, but offer no substance. Like, there's very clear that they don't understand what this job is. And I see this often. And one of the things that we do here at Sia Admissions to make sure that that doesn't happen is we ask everyone to write an elevator pitch of their goals. And that allows us to really help the applicant dive deeper into their goals, to understand and to research what this role entails and how is the business school going to help you with gaining those exposures and experiences. So the key is to explain your path without apology and to show how it aligns with your vision for the future, with the problems that you're looking to solve long term. I personally really like to work with multidimensional applicants. Oftentimes applicants see this as a problem. I see it actually as a strength. I think that, you are dynamic and we're all dynamic in our own way. And when there is multidimensionality, it just really demonstrates someone who is very curious. That's how I see those individuals. However, that doesn't mean that you leave your multidimensional self in sort of like this rogue way, in terms of like sharing everything without consistency or without an anchor, right? And the way I want you to think about this presentation is that the MBA, it's kind of you have a 2-year window in this MBA. You need to convince the reader, aka the admission committee, that you'll use that time wisely, that you know why you're going there, you know what experiences you're looking to get out of it, and those experiences are reasonable to be completed in a 2-year period. That means you choose a path that's aligned with your values, with your strengths, and what you want to learn, even if it evolves down the line. So even if it evolves as you go to business school, you experience things that you haven't even imagined that you could experience in business school. That doesn't mean that you go in with a very rigid approach that I will only do this and this alone, but you need to go with some kind of direction. Otherwise, you'll be losing a lot of time. You'll be in a lot of chaos, even more than it actually is. So having anchors, but still allowing the flexibility for what experiences show up in front of you, it's actually key to admission. So I'm going to share two stories that speak about some of our past clients who weren't the traditional candidate that one hears about. So this particular candidate spent about 4 years in nonprofit sector, but wanted to pivot to product management. This is a very huge shift on paper. What really made the difference was how we framed his work. So instead of focusing on mission-driven outputs alone, we highlighted his role in designing operational frameworks, working cross-functionally with different teams, and improving program delivery. these are skills that are very aligned with product management, which was the skills that he was looking to, or the role he was looking to get. He also didn't just state interest in product management, he backed it up based on experiences. So he sought out stretch assignments, collaborated on tech-driven initiatives to make the nonprofit better and more accessible. That exposure gave him really the language and the clarity to make his goals both authentic and informed. So the result, he, as you can see on the screen, he got a full ride to Michigan Ross, which is obviously a huge thing. You don't hear often about these in business schools, but it's, this is a huge pivot from where he was to where he wanted to go. But if you are purposeful, deliberate in terms of how you're presenting the story, then definitely makes for a compelling narrative, compelling enough to get a full ride. Another candidate who came in with a rich, multidimensional background. So she had pursued medical school, but ultimately left without completing, was an accomplished fictional writer, worked on different projects related to writing, mentored college students, and had a deep interest in healthcare systems. On their own, each of these experiences was really impressive, but together, when I initially saw her resumes, it created a narrative that felt fragmented and hard to follow. So initially, she tried to tie everything together, so medical or medicine, medical history, storytelling, mentorship, systems thinking, but it all ended up really diluting her message. What we did then instead was identify the underlying through line, right? You hear me talk a lot about through lines. Which was for her, it was her commitment to improving healthcare delivery, not from a client side, but from an operational excellence side, which obviously affect the client, the patient that is receiving that care. So by anchoring her story in healthcare operations for mission-driven organizations, we created clear, compelling trajectory that honed her past without overcomplicating it. Her goals felt precise. Her pivot away from medicine was positioned with intention, and her passion came through with clarity. What does this lead to? Full ride at UNC, major scholarships at Fuqua, UCLA, and Tepper. What I want you to take away from this is, of course, first and foremost, everyone has their unique story, right? But what I want you to take away from this is to realize that the divergent pathways that you see here that on paper don't seem to connect with one another and you may be worried about, it's actually not something necessarily that you need to worry about having had, because all those experiences make you uniquely you. What you need to realize is that actually business schools won't penalize you for your complexity. They can reward you for the clarity in which you present them that aligns with, of course, your mission, your values, as well as, of course, what the business schools are looking for in terms of the cohort they're putting together. What's important to remember is that you don't need to have all the answers, but you need to have a story that makes sense to the people reading your application. So be honest to a certain extent, be clear, and above all, you have to be strategic in terms of how you're presenting your narrative and your experiences. Your path also does not have to be linear, and many paths are not linear at all. It just has to be intentional in terms of how you are presenting it. So we have about 15 minutes today. We're gonna go through some questions. If you have questions that you would like to ask in terms of your career, what does it look like? What are you worried about in terms of your story? And how we can support you with that, then I'm happy to answer those questions. Just write us clearly as you can, given that we're not actually talking one-on-one. But if you'd like to have a one-on-one conversation about supporting your MBA applications, then definitely feel free to reach out via our website, siaadmissions.com. and request a consultation. It's free. We get a chance to actually speak one-on-one with your specific case and see how we can support in that presentation. Now, for this live session, I would love to hear what questions you have for me, and then we can go from there. I'm monitoring this by myself today, so I'm just checking to see where we are and what questions are coming in. All right, so as a reminder, while I still have you all here, next week I'm going to be discussing about spotting your strengths and weaknesses or red flags in your candidacy. So I encourage you to register for that. Write your questions down, because that helps me make sure that I'm answering that in my presentation. This way, when you watch it as a replay, you can get your question answered. All right, let me just do this. All right, so a question that came through in the registration, I'm just going to show it on the screen. So, is there a framework or a set of questions I can use to evaluate my profile for the admission officer's perspective, from the admission officer's perspective, so I can see my own blind spot before they do? This is an excellent question. They are, of course, when you look at business school, the way they're evaluating a candidate, they're looking at your academics, so your undergraduate performance. If you've done graduate work, that as well, but it has less weight than undergrad. Your test score, so GMAT or GRE, how competitive is to the class profile, or the average class profile. They're looking at your background in terms of what experiences have you had? Have you had promotions? Have you led any initiatives? Have you grown in an organization? What kind of projects you worked on? Who are you working for? Your engagement, extracurricular engagement, both in college and for those who have extracurricular now, like since college. There are some exceptions that they understand that some roles do have very complex schedules, which impede someone from being able to engage in extracurriculars. So they understand that, but they want to see that you're not going to be someone who just shows up to class and leaves and is not engaged in an MBA program. So those are components that you can definitely think about in terms of where you stack up compared to the rest of the profile. We do have a MBA profile evaluation. So I'm going to just put this on the screen here. This allows you to write your questions, or rather respond to the questions, upload your resume. You get a score that tells you where does that place you in the competitiveness of an MBA candidate. And you also get a report from me that looks at like what you shared. So if you share your resume, that's why I said upload your resume. This way it allows me to actually look at your resume and your experiences and be able to give you some commentary that would give you another set of eyes in terms of making sure that you don't miss any red flags in your candidacy. All right, so next question is, if you've worked at a well-known company, how can I ensure I'm not overly relying on its brand to carry me? This is an excellent question. I see this often. Applicants who are consultants working at Deloitte, Accenture, any of these big name companies, you're not going to be the only person who is applying to these schools that you're targeting as well, right? Your peer group is also going to be applying. And most of you, if you are around the same age, you're going to have also similar experiences. You may have worked on different projects, but very similar experiences. What's important here is really to be thoughtful in terms of how you're presenting your narrative, how you're presenting your story, and making sure that you're diving deeper into those experiences that you've had and what value did you bring to the project and what outcome did it have. So it's really important, especially for those who are coming in from well-recognized institutions that have a lot of applicants. You want to make sure that you're presenting yourself in a differentiating perspective from the rest of the of the class. So that would be definitely something that I would be focusing a lot on, which means storytelling, your resume, in your essays, your letters of recommendation should also showcase you as someone who is highly different from your peer group, from the person who sits maybe 2 cubicles down from where you are. All right. Let me see. Okay. Oh, I see a question here that came in. I'm going to read it just so your name doesn't show up on the screen. I have a 3.35 GPA, and I'm practicing testing for the GRE now. So meaning you don't have a GRE. From a purely stats standpoint, if I score 330 plus on the GRE, do I think I can get Knight Hennessy at MIT and MIT LGO or an MS MBA at a top 10 school? Honestly, test scores are not the only factors that help you get in. I see so many applicants with perfect test scores, strong GPA, still not get in. Scholarships are Knight Hennessy. It's a full ride scholarship that's offered from Stanford, and it is highly competitive because it applies to all graduate level applicants apply to it. So it's going to be competitive. I think 3.35 GPA, we've helped applicants with less than that or lower score than that in the GPA get into M7s. So I think that's possible, but this is all is dependent on the rest of your story. So business schools in the US are, yes, they're looking at your test scores and your academic GPA from the perspective of, are you going to be able to handle the academic rigor that we will ask of you? And there will be a huge amount of academic rigor, even though you're in business school, especially for the school that you're looking at. But the story is the thing that you have to focus on. It looks like you're sold. Perfect. Reach out. We can have a conversation and share your resume. This way we can dive deeper into where you are with your candidacy. Excellent. Okay, let me go through. We have another 8 minutes before we end. Let me just make sure there are no questions on Instagram. All right. Let's go to questions that came through. All right, so another question that came through is, if I've taken unconventional paths or had detours in my career, how do I make sure those choices aren't viewed as risky? It all depends on the successes that you've had, right? So if you've taken detours and you've succeeded along the way, that actually shows adaptability. If you have taken, when I see applicants, and you saw a few in the presentation that have unconventional pathways, it is really important to make sure that we are presenting a narrative that is anchored on cohesion and clarity. So you, first and foremost, if you're taking unconventional paths, then you have to showcase that you've had success in those paths. But it all, at least the way we approach things at Sia here, it's everything is anchored on your goals and where you're looking to go. So even your pathways and your experiences, when you think about it, business schools expect a one-page resume. Obviously, you've done more than what can be captured in a one-page resume. So you do have to make sure that when you're presenting your narrative, you're presenting it from the lens of where you're looking to go. So if your work has been kind of like in different pathways, but you're looking to go into product management, then you have to look at what experiences have you had that align with that future aspirations. Obviously, it doesn't mean that you have to be a product manager currently, but there are skills that you build along the way, right? A CEO doesn't just wake up and be a CEO tomorrow, unless they're starting their own company. But just, generally speaking, they build experiences over years and years of work. And the same thing for you. You've built experiences along those detours that you have taken in your career. So it's really important to look at your application strategically and in terms of like a narrative, a story across the board, not just the story that you're writing in an essay format, but a story that you're telling through all the different pieces of the application, whether that's short answer questions in the portal, your resume experiences that you've shared in terms of your career, obviously your essays, your letters of recommendation, and all the other pieces that make up the application, video essays, interviews, and all those stuff. All right, let's go to the next question. Okay. What's the best way to identify parts of my application, like my resume or work history, might be raising questions I don't even think to address? Honestly, oftentimes this kind of thing, it's really hard to be able to see yourself just because you are too close to it. Oftentimes you need to give this resume or essay or anything to someone else to read it that doesn't know your story, because our mind, what it does is it fills in the gaps that's missing on the page. And you just, I mean, unless you're not human, like that's essentially like that's part of who we are. The closer you are to something, the more likely you are that you're going to be missing the things that are necessary. And I see this so many times happen. So you need to give it to a friend, someone who doesn't know you particularly, because they will be able to see those gaps that you are missing, because they will say, oh, wait, well, does this mean this? And then you're like, no, I didn't want to say that at all. So it allows you to actually see those details and address them, obviously, before they go in. Obviously, when you work with a coach, that's what they do all day, every day, is look at applications and look for red flags and have systems around to make sure, in their own way, to make sure that they are looking at your application from cohesive perspective, from a macro level perspective as well as micro level, of course, in terms of what you're sharing. This next question is great. So what if I've been so close to my story for so long that I can't tell what stands out anymore? It is very, very true. When I applied to Yale, I felt the same way. It worked on my essays for 6 months, and I think I had 20 different versions of the essays. And at the time I didn't know that admission coaches actually existed. So I just asked, people in my community. And then some things I was like, no, I don't agree with what they're saying. And other things were, okay, that makes sense. Let me try to integrate that into the story. So obviously that was a process. Doing it by myself for 6 months was quite stressful. So I understand this for sure. I think here you need individuals that are supporters, your cheerleaders, individuals that see your strengths. And, that's actually something that we are really proud of in terms of what we do here at Sia. Is when we work with candidates, we're not just looking at what your stats and can we help you tell a story. It's actually, we need to believe in your story, because we need to also be your cheerleaders when you have doubts. And you will have doubts in this process, because that's just part for the course, essentially. Like you go through this process and have doubts and have questions and are uncertain and all of that. And so have supporters around you who are your cheerleaders, who are giving you the boost, telling you how great you are along the way, and making sure that you don't forget that as you are putting together applications and as putting together the vulnerable parts of your story. All right. I think that's all we have for today. I encourage you to join us next week. We're actually going to talk about red flags. Oops. And you can ask your questions. What are some red flags that you think you would want to know in your story, that you want to make sure that you address? So ask your question in your registration. This way it allows me to make sure that I'm integrating that into my responses. And if you want to have a conversation about how we can support your round 1, round 2 applications, definitely reach out. There's a QR code on the screen, or if you go to siaadmissions.com, you can book a free consultation. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. I will see you next week, same time, Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern time, for another live session. Have a great one.